well, today we are at Psalm 46. So if you have your Bibles, turn with me to Psalm 46. So how many of you love summer and the thought of vacation? All right, how many of you, when you vacation, you like to camp? Now, when we're saying camping, we're talking the people who like to camp in tents. Where are my tent-loving people? Raise your hands. Okay, these are the sick ones. I'm just kidding. How many of you, like, if you're camping, you need a camper? How many of you the camper people? All right, yeah, bring it on. If you can drag it with you, that's what you want to sleep in, right? It's off the ground. There's running water, electric. Now, for us as a family, when we go camping, it usually involves cabins or houses because that's the way God intended camping. I'm just letting you know, a cabin or a house. And so our family has some happy memories of some of the different places that we have camped. One time we went up to the Adirondacks and we went online and we found ourselves a cabin that was on the edge of a lake. Now for us, when we're looking for a place to camp, we like cabins or houses on the edge of lakes so we can go fishing and all those fun things. Well, I remember the first morning that I woke up after we got in one day, on, I forget whatever evening it was, we slept overnight, and I was the first one up in the morning. And I went down into the kitchen, and I looked on the counter, and there were little nuggets. They're like super small M&Ms, uncovered, which gave me a sign that, you know what? We've got mice in this place. Now, as a husband, I have learned some things. Pastor Rachel does not like mice inside houses or cabins. And so I was like, oh no. And so I did what every good husband ought to do in those moments. I tried to hide all the evidence, and I washed everything. And I'm like going, maybe we just, maybe it was just luck of the draw, right? And maybe they'll leave us alone. Well, my wife was a little suspicious when it's early in the morning and I'm doing dishes. And so she's like, what's going on? And I'm like, it's nothing, honey, really. Just, and I told her. And so you could see the I won't say anxiety, but the awareness rise in her, huh? And so the next day, sure enough, guess what we found again? We found more little M&Ms, and I'm like, this is not good. Well, this is one of those cabins that was, again, it's out in the middle of nowhere, and one of the features of this cabin is it had no internet, no TVs, and stuff like that, and, which for some is fun. And so we were like, what are we going to do? And so we brought my laptop, because we're like, as a family, we're going to watch movies, right? And we sit there with our family. And we set up the laptop, and this was a cute little cabin. It really was cute. It had this fireplace in the corner, and it had this like stonework going up to the ceiling, and it was open rafters. It was beautiful. And partway through the movie, all of a sudden, one of our furry friends decides to go running across the floor in front of the family as we watched this movie. And it's amazing the response it elicits in my bride. Because number one, all the feet come off the floor. There's generally a squeal of some kind. And we're like, ah! And we understand they're just mice. But for us, for the rest of the family, it just becomes fun when mom starts seeing the mice. And so it ran up the stone wall, up into the rafters. And my wife is all of a sudden all just angsty. It was the greatest camping experience ever, except for her. And every once in a while, this mouse would just peer out through the rafter and then sneak back in. And we're trying to watch it. My wife's, there it is again! And to poke his nose out and then bring it back in. And so finally, it decided to run down. I'm like, honey, don't worry, I got this. And so because it was a fireplace, there was this nice little piece of wood. And I'm like, I got this, honey. And sure enough, the mouse gets halfway down when I pounce. Bam! With my stick, which we called Mouse Bane. And over the next 2 nights, it became sport in our family because you never knew when the mice would come out. We would play games, and all of a sudden, the mouse would come running through, and Rachel, we saw her up on the table. She's standing up there, ah! And all the kids run and grab pieces of wood and chase mice. It was the greatest thing. But, and by the way, Rachel did not sleep well at all. And one of the things the mouse did, which I thought was the greatest, it actually climbed up on the nightstand next to her, knocked her chapstick off, and was gnawing on it. And so she didn't sleep well. The rest of us did, but she didn't. And just so you know, they couldn't give us enough money to let us go back. It was a wonderful experience. But I always think it's funny how it is that people respond when all of a sudden stuff happens. Stuff that may unsettle you. Stuff that'll come out of nowhere, disrupt your plans, disrupt your moments, and all of a sudden it can become incredibly overwhelming. And sometimes we can like lapse into, you know, a panic mode or a fearful mode where we're all of a sudden absolutely overwhelmed and overcome by the events that are happening around us. And as we look at Psalm 46 today, we're going to talk about from chaos to calm. And part of the idea is the recognition that in this world there's these moments that are going to come that are going to absolutely unsettle us. And maybe you've been in a place lately where something's unsettled you. It could be a doctor's report. It could be a relationship falling apart. It could be a loss of a job. It could be news that came out of nowhere that just absolutely shook you. That even though these things happen in this world, God's desire is to bring us to a place of calm. Have you ever seen those shirts that say, keep calm and carry on? Did you know those were actually, it was actually a campaign that was started in Great Britain in 1939 before the beginning of the Second World War? There was a sense that war was imminent. There was this sense that there was this army that at any moment that war was going to break out and the Germans were going to start flying over and they were going to start dropping bombs on the city. And how are we going to respond as a people? That was the concern. That was the question. How are we going to respond? And so one of the ideas that they came up with is we need to encourage our people to keep calm and carry on. Because if not, the fear will so overwhelm your life, it will so displace you that instead of knowing how or responding in ways that can be helpful, you can actually begin to respond in ways that are terribly hurtful. And the same is true for our lives. And again, the challenges of life have a way of threatening one's calm and as a result, one's conduct. And so how do we deal with the chaos that life brings? And as we look at Psalm 46, the big idea I want to think around is simply this, that confidence in the Creator enables calm in the chaos. That confidence in the Creator enables calm in the chaos. And so we're going to read Psalm 46 together. We have it for the screens. Awesome. And so we're going to put up there, we're actually going to read it together in just a moment. And so you'll find out that if you read the beginning of the psalm, you'll find out this is actually a psalm of the sons of Korah. The sons of Korah were actually temple keepers and temple singers during the reign of David and Solomon. And so what this psalm is it's actually a community song. It's something that God's people would sing together. It was a song we'll see within it. It's a song about a city, and that city is Jerusalem, that is the capital of the kingdom. But more importantly, it is the place of the temple, the dwelling place of God. And so when God's people were in times of angst and in the times of uncertainty, this would be a psalm that God's people would sing together. Now, the good news is this, is we're not going to sing it together because I don't know the tune. Though it tells us, I think, that there is a tune, but we don't know it. But what we're going to do is we're going to read it together. All right? And so if you want to put the words up, and here we go. Let's read this together. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. Though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shield with fire. He says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress." Isn't that a great psalm? Isn't that great? Like, as we read through it, you can kind of say, wow, who is this God that we serve? And as we look at this, I want to just note three things about this psalm. First of all is this, is the psalm's confidence in the Creator. I love how it begins. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Now, in our time, we don't have refuges. Like when we talk about a refuge, we can think about a wildlife refuge, a place that's safe for animals. But in the time that this was written, a refuge was a place that one could run to when threats arose. And this was part of the importance of some of these cities, a city like Jerusalem, because they were known for their fortifications, they were known for their walls, and they had gates that surrounded them and had the ability to keep invaders out. It was a place from which people can begin to push back against the enemy. And the psalmist begins simply by saying that our trust is not in the walls and the gates of the city, but in the God who made everything. Like, our confidence doesn't rest in the walls. It doesn't rest in the gates. It rests in our God. And I think this is important because in our world, in the way we live, there are so many things that we create or we put around our lives to provide a sense of safety and security. Sometimes we'll say, if I can get enough money in the bank account. How many know that sometimes the amount of money in your bank account can seem like walls around you? It can be a good feeling to know that, hey, if something happens, we can, if the car breaks down, we can pay for that and get it fixed. How many know that's a good feeling? How many of you know the feeling when the car breaks down and there's no money to fix it? And all of a sudden you feel absolutely exposed. You're like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. And not only are you just having a car problem, now you're having, this emotional crisis because all of a sudden the lack of car is creating chaos. And so sometimes we're like, well, we just got to save some money because the money is going to provide this wall that's going to protect me from, cars breaking down and ruining my life. So we'll do it with money. We'll create barriers around our lives. Sometimes we'll do it with relationships. If I can get the right relationship, I'll feel comfortable. I'll feel safe. I'll feel secure. I'll feel like, everything's okay. And so we create walls. If I get the right job, the right house. And there's nothing wrong with these things. The thing that the psalmist wants us to understand, though, is that those things, though good, aren't really the important things. They're not the things that ultimately guard and protect and keep safe. And this is why the psalmist simply begins by saying, God is our refuge and strength. It's not the walls and the gates. It's our God. It's great as you read through the Hebrew Scriptures. The names of God that we find, the different words, because they're often associated with different events. So the word God that we often find in the Old Testament is Elohim. That's the Hebrew word. And this has to do with God and His power, specifically in His ability to create. So many of you, you're familiar with Genesis 1:1 that says this, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And this idea of God here is this being of enormous power and strength who's able to bring life out of everything. What's so amazing is as you read through that account, that it mentions a sea creature. How many of you love sea creatures? You grew up like, Loch Ness Monster, how amazing is this? So down through history, there's always been this fear of creatures of the deep, the threatening animal that has to be vanquished and conquered, like the Kraken, right? All these different things. What's interesting in the creation account, this big scary thing of the deep, is actually one of the pets of God. He's the one who makes it. He's not intimidated or scared. He's so great that even the thing that scares everybody, he's still above that. And this is why the psalmist declared, listen, God, the God who made all of this, he is our refuge and our strength. He's the God who has the power to speak worlds into existence. Not only can he speak worlds into existence, but we see even in this passage that he speaks and the earth melts. And this idea of melting here is really an image that's used throughout the Old Testament to describe the fear that would render the enemies of God's people unable to stand because of God's presence. That there's nothing that can stand against him. And this is why they would simply declare, listen, he is an ever-present help in trouble. And this becomes one of the big themes in this psalm, is the simple fact that God is present, even in trouble. He's the one who we can call to and reach out to in our difficulties. And because of this, because God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble, therefore, we will not fear. Everybody say, therefore. Therefore is functioning in the place there as, because of this first statement, this is how we are going to respond in the world that we're a part of. That God is our refuge and strength. He is an ever-present help in trouble. And because of that, therefore, we will not fear. You know, it's interesting as you look at humans and their capacity for fear. And what it is that fear does to us. Like, we could take time to talk about the physiological effects of fear. Did you know that if you live in a constant state of fear, you're likely to die early? And the reason is because that emotional energy is releasing things in your body that begins to work against you. Yeah, it may be useful and helpful in moments, but it's no way to live. Because in living in that place, it will ruin you. And really, what is humanity's response to fear? Well, sometimes we freeze. Have you ever been so scared you couldn't move? And not just the boo kind, where all of a sudden something happens that's so overwhelming, and all of a sudden these ideas and images of what's going to take place, and all of a sudden you're like, I don't even know what to do next. I am stuck. That's what fear will do. Sometimes it causes us to run from the places that we're supposed to be. In fear's first appearance in the Bible, we find out because of Adam's sin and the recognition then of his own nakedness, as God came into the garden, God asks the simple question, where are you? And he's like, I'm hiding. Right? And we find that humanity hiding from God. And he says, I was afraid, so I hid. Sometimes in our lives there are things that begin to scare us, and because of it we begin to hide. We begin to cower. We begin to, put walls and gates around ourselves and saying, you know what, I'm just gonna hide in this place. I was afraid, so I hid. Sometimes when we fear, we don't just freeze or run or flee, but sometimes we end up fighting. Now, I'm a hockey-loving person. How many here know that the right sport is hockey? Hallelujah. Right? So I always love it because, it's a great place to take out aggression. Right? You can run into people, and they let you do it. Every once in a while, they'll let you drop the gloves and greet one another. Lay hands on one another. But what's interesting is that that sometimes we can be in such a state of fear that what we end up doing is every interaction actually becomes a battle. I've seen this take place in marriages. I've seen this take place between kids where there's a sense of fear, an uncertainty that creates this dissonance or this disagreement that goes on. And sometimes when fear is at work in our lives, we're fighting battles we should never be a part of. And this is why the psalmist says, listen, as a people, our confidence needs to be in our Creator. And it invites us to really think and consider, what is it that we are seeking refuge in? What is it when times arise of difficulty, of uncertainty, of fear? What are we trusting in? The second thing in the psalm that I want to note is not only confidence in the Creator, but I want you to note that in this psalm there's this aspect of confronting the chaos. That in this world we experience chaos. And the psalmist is going to highlight two sources of chaos. And just so you know, we all know there are lots of sources of chaos. But he notes two. He'll note the chaos of nature as well as the chaos of nations. The chaos of nature, the chaos of nations. The chaos of nature, he uses a description. He says that we will not fear even though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. And it talks about the sea roaring and quaking with its foaming. And really what's being described here is the picture of an earthquake and its resulting tsunami. It's the idea that the earth gave way. Now, how many here have been a part of an earthquake? They are really unsettling. Now, the biggest earthquake I remember experiencing was in Granville, and it was only like 4 on the Richter scale, and it was like 150 miles away. And we woke up in the morning because the whole house was just shaking. And at first I thought it was the alarm clock, and then I was like going, I don't think I have my alarm clock on vibrate. But I just remember the whole house was just kind of shaking. It was this weird thing, and we find out it's an earthquake. But earthquakes are phenomenal energy that if you want to feel small, look at what an earthquake will do. Back in 2010 in Chile, in the city is Concepcion, and there was an earthquake that measured 8.8 on the Richter scale. Okay, which is ginormous. This is how big this earthquake was. This city of over 200,000 people was moved 10 feet. Okay, like you take the city, not a building, a city, and you move a city 10 feet. That is a phenomenal amount of power and energy. And it's very chaotic. And there's this sense that, we're not going to fear even if the earth gives way and the mountains are falling into the sea, even if the earth itself is shaking and the waters roar and foam with their quaking. And it's interesting because the waters here are those turbulent, uncontrollable waters that threaten humanity. And they're actually the same kind of waters that are mentioned in Genesis 1:2, where it says this, "Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters." The Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And what's amazing is this is the place from which God, Elohim, begins to bring beauty out of the chaos. That in the place of shaking, in the place of this uncertainty, in the midst of the turbulent and uncontrollable, even the thing that threatens, God says, listen, I will bring good and beauty out of this. And so, He makes the world. And out of the chaos, He begins to form. He begins to bring order and shape, and then He begins to fill. Now, what's amazing about this is that as God does this in our creating, we'll find in the Genesis 3 story where sin enters humanity, we see in Genesis 1 God's creating. In Genesis 3 we see sin's uncreating. Because what sin begins to do in our life is it begins to deconstruct, it begins to break down things, it begins to bring chaos and disorder, it begins to take beauty and make something ugly, it begins to take something good and it begins to make it bad. That's what sin does. If you remember in Genesis 2, Adam is shaped from the dust of the earth, yet when sin comes in, God says, to dust you will return. And there's this great uncreating, there's this chaos that enters. Yet we have a God who is still greater than the chaos we can create for ourselves. How many know that we have the potential to create a little bit of chaos through the choices that we make? And it can shake everything. It can shake our families. It can shake the home that we're in, our perspective. It can shake everything. Yet in the midst of this, we have a God who is still greater than that. And I love in verse 4 where it goes on to say that there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. And there's this imagery then of a river. And this is what I love about Psalms, because as you read through them, you got to think about the imagery. But there's a river. And the interesting thing is, wherever there's a river, there's life. In Jerusalem and the areas around, that the place where things were vibrant were where the rivers were. Even Eden itself, when it was created, it was between the 4 rivers. What's amazing as you read through the scriptures is how the imagery of river is used over and over and over again. And the source of every river that we see in whether it's Ezekiel 47, Revelation chapter 22, is that we see that God is the source of all living water. And what's great in Ezekiel chapter 47, that there's a river that flows from the throne of God that has increasing depth. And it brings you to a place where you're actually able to not just wade in it, but eventually swim in it. And as Ezekiel has this great vision of this river that flows from the presence of God, not only is there, all this, water, but eventually there's life. And the vision says it ends up in the Dead Sea. Now, the reason it's called the Dead Sea is because there's nothing that lives in it. Like there's way too much salt in it, and it's a dead sea. And because of it, because of the water that flows from the temple, that God even makes the Dead Sea come back to life. And Ezekiel tells the people this, guys, listen, wherever the river flows, everything will live. And he goes on to say, with their leaves will not wither, nor will their fruit fail. And every month they will bear fruit, because the water from the sanctuary flows to them. And their fruit will serve for food, and their leaves for healing. And what's amazing about this, that the very last picture that we have in the Bible echoes these exact same things. That there is a river that flows from God's presence. And that as that presence flows, there is life and there is fruit. There is something where there might have been chaos and disorder, but all of a sudden, wherever life is flowing, where the river of God flows, there is life and good and beauty and ultimately healing. And the psalmist wants to remind us that the presence of God is both for recreating and restoration. So you get the chaos of the earth, you also get the chaos of nations. Nations are in an uproar. Kingdoms fall. And so there's this whole picture, whether it be nature or nations, there's this aspect of chaos taking place. Yet even if it's the chaos of nations, God is still greater than the nations. And this is important because sometimes our hearts get a little overwhelmed by what goes on in nations. Sometimes we can watch the news and we see the things that go on, and sometimes we're like going, oh my goodness, can anything good come out of this? That it seems sometimes we're so small, and decisions are being made for us, and there's nations that are moving around, and what is our part in this? And we can be overwhelmed by it. Yet the psalmist declares, come and see what the Lord has done. And then he says this, that it's kind of like, you don't know if it's something you should be excited about or not. You ever have those moments you're reading the Bible like, okay, so is this a good thing or a bad thing? Because it says this, come and see the desolation God has done. Right? And you're all like, desolation? That means things got broken. But what it's saying is this, is that with all the nations, that there's actually no one or nothing that is greater than God. Because even with nations, in the end, God will stand greater than them. And we have to hold on to a hope that says our God is a refuge and strength and ever-present help in times of trouble, whether it's personal trouble or even national trouble. Our hope rests in God. Come and see what God has done. And then the psalmist goes on and said, listen, he makes war cease. He breaks the bow, he shatters the spear, he burns the shield. He takes the implements of war and says, listen, this is not my heart, this is not my desire. My desire is peace. And please understand that the God that we serve longs to not only restore and recreate, but he longs to bring peace. Not a peace that is simply the absence of strife, but the wholeness that comes when chaos is set aside. You see, we have a God who steps into the chaos to create beauty and restore peace. The last thing I want to note about the psalm is the confession of closeness. It says this, the Lord Almighty is with us. See, who's with you? Like when you're in the midst of the difficulty and the danger, when you're in the midst of the chaos and the uncertainty, who's with you? Who's with you? See, the Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Now, if you'll notice, it says it in verse 7, and then it'll say it again in verse 11. Okay, so this is like the refrain. This is like the chorus of the song. It's that part of the song that you sing over and over and over and over again because you're trying to drive home the point. Now, we sort of did it this morning. And we know that when we sang, "Great, you give love, you give life, you are love." I got to remember all the words, right? But then it says, "Great are you, Lord." And what did we declare over and over and over again this morning? Great are you, Lord. You see, there's something important about us repeating. There's something important about having a refrain where we declare over and over and over again the goodness and greatness of God. Because the truth is we forget about it. Because we get so caught up in what's going on that sometimes we forget the important truths like the Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And then it says this, and he's the God who says, "Be still and know that I am God." Be still. Now, I've heard people say that be still means just be silent. It doesn't mean to be silent. Being still means giving God the space to let him do what God does while we trust him. Be still and know that I am God. And then he says this, I will be exalted among the nations, and I will be exalted in the earth. Okay, so in the part before, there's no one greater than God. In this passage, the psalmist is declaring there's no one higher than God. I will be exalted. Like at the end of the day, God says, I'll be exalted. The problem for us is we're not terribly patient. We don't like waiting for the end. We want it all done right now. Yeah, God says, listen, I'm not done yet. And I want you to know I'll be exalted. I'll be exalted in the nations. I'll be exalted in the earth. You think it's the things that are fearing you, and you see the things that are concerning you, that you're fearful of, and you think, this must be greater. And God says, no, trust me. I am greater still. Be still and know that I am God. You see, he is the God who is with us. In the midst of the chaos and the uncertainty, he is the God who is with us. This is why I say confidence in the Creator enables calm in the chaos. That if we can just have God, if we can just hold him and trust him, if we can just be still enough, we'll find out that he's God. So how do we find calm in the chaos? We've got to remember who's over the waters. Just remember who's over the waters, who's over the things that are turbulent, the things that are beyond your control. Understand there's one who is still greater than. And his desire is to bring good to our situation. He longs to bring the order and the life And ultimately, the chaos will yield to His word. It was into the darkness that God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. I want you to know that God still speaks into your darkness. He speaks into your chaos, the uncertainty, to bring light. Remember who is over the water. But not only that, I would say make our hope your refrain. You see, what are you saying in the midst of your trouble? What are you saying in the midst of your adversity, in the midst of the pain and the confusion and the chaos? What is it that you're saying? Because I think we need to have a refrain, something that we can say over and over and over again to remind ourselves, something like, "The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress." What I think is interesting about this psalm, it's not just about individuals. It's about the people. And I think this is important because sometimes in the chaos we get a little overwhelmed. And it's hard to speak the refrain. And that's why we need the people around us. And we need to have people who are encouraging us. People who will sing with us. People who will remind us of the importance of God's refuge in the midst of adversity. Because when you're having trouble saying it, God has provided people who can help sing it with you. And you may not have the words at the moment, but don't worry. God has people that can help carry the tune. The last thing I note for finding calm in the chaos, remember who is over the waters. Make our hope your refrain. And then lastly, look for the river. This is the part of the psalm I love. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. Because I've known this, in the midst of chaos, they are generally not glad times. There's fear and uncertainty, there's sadness, there's all sorts, there's hurt, disappointment, discouragement. But the psalmist says, listen, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. See, that means that in the midst of your chaos, there's a gladness that you can find. It's probably not going to be the gladness for the situation, but a gladness that arises because of the God who holds you. I may not be able to see the end from here, but I know who holds me. And see, we need to be a people who pursue His presence. To be a people that simply say that He has made me glad. See, in your chaos, in your uncertainty, have you found the river of gladness? Have you found it? Because it flows from God's presence. And the great news is He is with us. And if we'll yield our hearts and bend our hearts toward Him, we will find the joy and strength necessary to keep moving forward. Confidence in the Creator enables calm in the chaos. In the midst of our trouble, because of His presence, we can keep calm and carry on. Even when the things arise that overwhelm, that unsettle our hearts, we can be still and know that He is God. And I want you to know we're praying for you. Because I know in this place, I know those watching, I know that there are people, you are going through some storms right now, you're in the midst of some chaos. And it's easy to allow your heart to become so bent by it that it begins to affect your conduct, how you relate to others, how you relate to God, what it is you begin to do. But I want you to know God's not done. And He cares so much about you. It's the whole reason Jesus came. To let you know that He loves you. And so that His grace and mercy can meet you. So let's pray. Father, I thank You that You are good. I thank You that You are a refuge and a strength, an ever-present help in trouble. And God, you know where each one of us are at. You see the things that have been going on in our week, in our times. You see the struggles. Lord, you're aware of the walls and gates that we've tried to find security and safety within. Yet ultimately, it's only in you that we can find the hope in life that is needed. And Lord, I just pray right now in this moment, Lord, that in this moment you would begin to bring a calm and a peace. That you would begin to bring hope and confidence. Lord, I thank you that there is a stream that makes glad the city of God. Lord, I pray that your grace and goodness would just begin to flow and touch each heart. Because, God, we need you. Lord, may our confidence be in you, our Creator, our Redeemer, our Savior. Lord, I thank you that you are above the waters, above the chaos, working to bring order and fullness in life. And so, God, we just yield our troubles and our distresses to you. Lord, there is no one higher than you. There's no one greater than you. And so we trust you. Just while your heads are bowed and your eyes are closed, how many would just simply say, there's some chaos that I'm dealing with. And I need the calm of the Creator just to touch my heart and my life. If that's you, would just raise your hand. I want to pray with you. See those hands. Thank you. Is there anyone else? Father, you see each hand. You see each heart. So, Lord, I pray right now for a calm and a peace to surround them. Lord, I pray that you would bring to pass grace and goodness. And Father, in those moments where they are trying and struggling to make good happen, Father, I pray that your grace would step into their lack. Father, may they learn to be still in you and know that you are God. Bless your people, I pray. In Jesus' name.